Hello and welcome to the first episode of Where Everybody Has Gone Before. We're a Star Trek discussion podcast because the world needs another of those. There's not enough of them out there. We need two more people talking about Star Trek episodes as and when we come to them. I'm one of your hosts, Laura. I have been a long time enjoyer of Star Trek. That's an obvious thing for me to say. I'm here hosting a Star Trek podcast. I'm here with my lovely co-host Geoffrey. How are you?
I'm all right. I looked this up the other day when we were talking about names and stuff, and I think it was something like 450 podcasts in the list I saw about Star Trek. So we're
Yeah.
pioneers, we're trailblazers.
Yeah, so we've wanted to make a show for a while together, and we discussed far more original ideas than this. But this is the one that stuck.
We had
This
some
is
we had some really good ideas that
yeah,
we decided not to do, so we could talk about Star Trek instead.
exactly. So the gist here is a couple of times a month we are gonna pick an episode of Star Trek to talk about through various means. Sometimes it will be a randomized wheel of every episode of Star Trek that's ever existed. Sometimes it might just be I want to talk about this episode, so screw the wheel. We're just picking one. This first episode, we used a wheel. We have a wheel that has basically every episode of Star Trek on it. I checked; it doesn't have the most recent season of Strange New Worlds or Starfleet Academy, which is currently airing, and we're not going to talk about that until season one's done, at least. So, other than that, we rolled a wheel of 944 episodes of Star Trek, and we got an episode of a Star Trek series that Geoffrey has never watched before.
Which, which isn't it's not the only one. I mean, I haven't watched any Lower Decks either, so
Yeah, we landed on.
we'll be here again.
We'll be here again. Yeah, so we spun 944, which got us Star Trek sorry. We rolled 929, which is Star Trek Prodigy season 2, Ascension part 1, and we're doing part 2 as well because we're not going to leave a story half done, and also it's 20-minute episodes, so why not? Um yeah, you have no context for Star Trek Prodigy, right?
Oh, and I watching these episodes, I very clearly needed a lot of context
I
for what this was. This was not a serialized adventure. This was very much we've had two seasons of other stuff going on that
yeah,
you need to know.
I'll say this: you picked we landed on maybe the only episode of Prodigy that at least attempts to summarize what's been recently happening, but you are 100% jumping in at nearly the end of season 2 of what very quickly became like a long running story. So I can give you some background context that maybe gets you up to speed, or do we just jump in
But
and address that
let me try and
context when it
guess,
comes up?
right?
Yeah, give me your
Because
best guess.
so they obviously have a little bit at the beginning of the first part of this where they do talk about some stuff that's been happening. They use a lot of names that I had no idea what they mean. I assume they're the characters I've been watching. As I understand it, Prodigy takes place in an alternate timeline
um,
on on a ship called the Protostar, and Chakotay has been lost in time again because he keeps getting lost in time. And when we join the story here, at some point they've gone over into the normal timeline of Star Trek. So
mm.
not the one we see in Voyager, and that reunites Chakotay with now Admiral Janeway, and they have to put the protostar back in the other timeline to preserve everything.
Kind of,
How
kind
close am I?
of. You're pretty close, honestly. The gist of it, uh, some of this is important, some is not. So some of this is just giving you some flavor. There was a planet where a guy was basically making children and mine stuff because he was like, I've heard there's this ship there called the Protostar. I'm gonna make child slaves dig to try and find this ship. Child slaves find it and run away with it, run away with the thing. Um, this is in the prime Star Trek timeline. They're not from an alternate timeline, But for most of 2 seasons, they've been accidentally fucking up time travel in ways that have caused problem after problem that they've then tried to fix and then created more problems. Um, the Protostar basically had a virus on it where if it was ever brought back to the Federation, it was going to destroy everything. Um, and in trying to stop this virus destroying everything in the Federation, and then trying to rescue Chakotay, who was the one who time traveled the ship in the first place, it's time travel paradoxes on top of time travel paradoxes, and you've jumped in right at the moment where they've rescued Chakotay, but the timeline is still threatening to just implode on itself.
So I made some notes about these episodes, right? And right at the top of the notes, I've circled a line that said, "This is a show for children."
Yeah,
Because I need to keep reminding myself of that, right? That you need to give it a little bit of leeway because
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
for a 34-year-old man. I'm glad they kept it simple for the kids, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because here's the thing: I watched maybe 5 episodes of Prodigy at one point and gave up on it, and I binged it in the last 2 days because I wanted to be able to talk about these episodes with some context. Um, Maybe episodes 1 to 7 are like adventure of the week fart joke children's show. And then very quickly it goes, actually, no. What if we introduced like every Star Trek concept that's ever existed and had conversations about like the eugenics wars? But then every now and then there will still be like a little fart joke. Uh, it's it's a weird show, but I'm kind of invested in it.
I found it really strange and not necessarily in a bad way. I thought it looked really good when it was like outside in
Mm.
space. I think the people maybe looked a bit
It,
wonky.
the
It looked
original
very Star Wars Rebels to me.
the Star
Uh,
Star Wars Rebels is 100% the visual reference for it.
mm.
The original characters I think look decent. I think that any time where there's a live action human that they are recreating, it can get a bit wonky. I sent you that screenshot of plasticine looking Wesley Crusher from one episode who looks
He doesn't look
ancient.
better by this episode.
No, but you get a better look at him in other episodes, and it's like the human characters can be a bit uncanny valley. Like Janeway's not too bad, but anyone with facial hair looks a little odd.
Well, no, well, there's that. So I don't know any of the names.
I
There
can I can tell you,
is
I've got the names in front
is
of me.
the evil one's called Ascension,
Ascension, yeah.
and so the other alien of that race who's on Voyager and then
Gwyn.
the
We'll call her
Protostar,
Gwyn. Gwyn,
Quinn.
yeah.
That's the one, correct? Yes. They look great. They look really good.
Yeah.
But then whenever Chakotay is like in the background of a shot, it
Yeah.
looks like he's on green screen, even though he's an
Yes.
animated character. Like there's this really weird kind of halo about him because
It's
it's almost like we've got to keep the detail of
yeah.
Chakotay's face even though he's in the background.
Yeah.
Stuff like that kind of
It's the whatever the
gets me.
lighting they've done that makes the original characters look good, these cartoonish characters, doesn't necessarily work for the human characters, necessarily. And it's a shame because like in terms of like performance and writing, they fairly authentically brought these characters back, and I don't hate what they're doing with them. It's just they look a little out of place in the scene occasionally. So yeah, for anyone
Oh, so
who's
the other thing,
yeah,
sorry, just
oh, go ahead.
and there's two Captain Janeways. One of
Yes,
them is a hologram on the
yes.
Protostar. Has Chakotay just made like a hologram of his old girlfriend while he's been
No,
lost in space with these
so
kids? It all feels a
yeah.
bit
So the deal with the deal with the Protostar was after Janeway goes and becomes admiral, Chakotay gets given captaincy of his own ship, and they're basically like, "Hey, you get on really well with Janeway. Would it be helpful if your ship's computer looked like someone that you're friendly with?" So hologram Janeway is basically so that like, "Hey, this is your first command. What if your Alexa on your ship reminded you of a person you enjoy captaining a ship with?"
okay. Okay. The only response I have to that is okay.
Yeah, no. For anyone who's new to this, there'll be as many clips of this on the YouTube video as I can get away with putting on screen. But basically, it's supposed to be following the adventures of Dal, who is like a little purple 12-year-old who is your slightly snarky young audience surrogate character. He desperately wants to be a Starfleet captain, mainly because he thinks being in charge would be cool, and that's what all the cool characters should be aiming for, is to be in charge. You got Gwyn. Her entire planet is dying, and they blame the Federation, and she's trying to be like, hey, maybe we do a little bit of diplomacy about that. We got Jankum Pog, who always refers to himself with his full name. There's a backstory for why he full names himself every time as Jankum Pog.
He's the one who makes the new body for the
He's the one who makes the new body, yeah.
thing. Yeah, yeah. I
He
recognise that one because he kept doing that. It's like,
Yeah,
well,
no,
Jacob
he
Bob's
does
gonna make a new body.
he does that, and then like a season in, you get an episode that is like, here's the tragic backstory of why he says his full name every time he says his name. You got Zero, a cloud of gas that at one point is a humanoid, and then is a cloud of gas in a robot. And you got Rock. She's big and made of rocks.
Yes, I recognise that one as well because I was very much like, oh, it's actually quite cool to see a diverse range of aliens on a spaceship. Because normally in Star Trek you'll get like everyone's human because like everyone,
Yeah.
all the races in the galaxy were made by the same like protogenetic whatever.
Yeah.
That's pretty like out there Star Trek lore. I think we only get like 2 or 3 episodes like that. But it was quite nice to see both the aliens, but lots of different aliens working on that basic kind of baseline. But then you also see, inexplicably to me, Admiral Jellicoe rocks up from that one episode of Next Generation.
Yeah, there's a couple of characters thrown into this pair of episodes we watched that are like, oh, it's that one you know from somewhere else in Star Trek. Don't worry about how or why. We're throwing some faces at you basically to have like the parent that's watching along in the background be like, oh, I know that one. I can watch Star Trek with my kid.
But it does feel a bit like we need to incorporate this into the general narrative trail of new Trek,
Hmm.
if that's what we still call it. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of, oh well, the Romulan evacuation, or the androids are everywhere. Jellicoe's here now. Remember him? We didn't like him because he replaced Picard for a little bit, but now he's kind of the bureaucratic overseer of Janeway, who remains a rebel despite being an admiral now. It's and then there's a lot of, and all the adults are a little bit clueless, little bit. They're not useless, but they're a bit giving the kids enough room so the kids
Yeah.
can come up with all the cool ideas. It's very like, again, I'm going back to my notes. This is a show for children, Geoffrey. You can't get like frustrated with stuff, but it's all a bit like kind of like, okay, so we're still in like the reference area of Star Trek.
Yeah, you've jumped into Prodigy at what I would say is probably the most watchable point if you are someone that like, if you saw that like, hey, there's a new Star Trek show that involves Janeway and Chakotay in a post Voyager era. This pair of episodes, from what I've seen, is about the closest you will get to like, oh yeah, this is the continued adventures of Voyager, but also there's some kids around, and the kids are being given, as you say, that sort of reign to find the solutions to things. You got to go do a little bit of suspension of disbelief that like, oh, a child thought of that answer and Janeway didn't, but it doesn't feel like pain. It doesn't feel painfully like the adults aren't acting like serious, reasonable Starfleet captains.
Well, it feels like the adults are the adults in the room,
Yeah,
right? Like they will step in if necessary. Like I don't dislike
yeah.
any of this, right? It's not like I mentioned to you before, Valiant in DS9, where
Mm,
it's a bunch of kids being kids and it's really annoying and you kind of hate everybody. Like this, it's a likable. I've
yeah,
watched 2 episodes. It's a likable series. I would watch more.
yeah,
I especially appreciated all like the spacey stuff. I thought it looked really good. I thought it was well
yeah. I
thought out. I thought it was well choreographed.
I think given that we watched a two-parter here and it was maybe 40 minutes long, I think they did a decent job of having like a thing that regular Star Trek does genuinely kind of struggle with a little bit sometimes, which is multi-ship combat against a threat, like one big threat, where you are able to keep track of the multiple parts of the ensemble and feel like they are all contributing to one larger plan of the mission and still have room for the like on the ship level problems that are going on and do like a complete little that's a big threat. We had the three act structure of oh, we're on the back foot, now we've come up with the plan, oh, there's a sacrifice, oh, we've gotten to the end of it pretty quickly and efficiently. Like there wasn't a lot of wasted time in this pair of episodes.
Well, they also did the Star Trek 2009 thing, didn't they? Where like, all the bad guys are really spiky and insect-like. I genuinely thought that when that thing was coming through the portal, was it a portal? It didn't come out of warp, did it?
It
Like
sort
the
of
big
it
ship.
yeah, it sort of just
I
appeared out of
genuinely
nowhere
thought
as
that
if it
was
was cloaked, maybe?
yeah. I don't know, but I genuinely thought that was going to be like the Romulan ship from
Yeah.
Star Trek 2009 because it had that exact same kind of
Yeah, just
thing, and then you have like the
materializing, yeah.
drones from Beyond, and I'm
Mm.
like, I don't hate this, but I'm also still wondering like where reference ends and where
Well,
something else begins.
yeah, it's
But it
definitely
worked. It really worked for
yeah.
me. Like,
It I think they did a good job of like the enemy ship is like big and daunting in scale. They made it clear quickly that they're like the threat we're going up against. It's not clear with Ascensia exactly what technology she has, but she has it's talked about the fact that like on her planet because she's kidnapped Wesley Crusher and is using him to see visions of the future, and she's used that to build time bubble domes on her planet, and basically by having pockets of dilated time, she is able to create like armies and technology she should not have. And I think like that's a reasonably clearly made threat that when like really big ship shows up with a bunch of little drones, even if ultimately they're just fodder to be shot at, there's enough in the back of my head where I was like, I fear that maybe they've got tech I'm not ready for. And I guess they kind of do eventually with the here's the big projectile that fast forwards time if it
the
hits
old
your
man
ship.
Ray.
Yeah, the old man Ray. But
Yeah.
it's like it's enough of a thing where it's like, oh, that's even if you didn't have future tech and the old man Ray, that's still an imposing class of ship. And they quickly establish there's no backup, it is just you and this thing.
But I think it also does something that I think a lot of Star Trek struggles with, where there's a threat to the Federation, and it's a threat you can actually believe is going to be a threat because they've got
Yeah.
some in the same way the Dominion was, where oh the Dominion are so good at tracking us through cloaks, and they've got some weird time dilation technology that they'll fire onto the ship and it'll make us all old and make the ship rust. I can get on
Yeah.
board with that in a way that I can't say with well the Romulans are a bit mean sometimes and they're basically the same as us.
Yeah. Um One thing, again, talking about the fact that this is largely a kid-operated show, I like the way that they split the groups up in the big fight on this. I like that the majority of our team of children are put under a supervising adult. They're put on the Protostar because, like, for most of the series, they have been piloting the Protostar basically with an AI going, no, 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 press that button. So they've had enough time to go. Believably, this is a crew of people that like maybe it is worth putting these kids on the Protostar over these adults. These kids have at least been on this ship and know roughly how it works. It's not the most unbelievable place to put them. The kids in their own little shuttles that are sent out are, at least in theory, being told, go get some scans of where the weapons are and come back. Like, they're explicitly not being given, or they're not supposed to be being given a frontline role, which I appreciate. And the Voyager itself is just like, we're going to have a ship that is just the adults. And we keep the kids out of the way of that. It's smart in a way that like I don't think it feels patronizing to a child audience that like you've largely put the kids aside under supervision or doing a job that shouldn't be too dangerous.
I don't think it, it works into the kind of issues you can have with Starfleet broadly that we might come to in other episodes because I think it's going to be more focused. But there is a kind of child soldiery kind of bent to a utopia where you can do anything, including joining the military at like 14. And
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think the way they handle it here is very. We'll put you in somewhere where we don't anticipate you're going to be in real danger,
Or at the very least, it's the
even if
least
you
dangerous place
ultimately
we
are.
could put you. If
Yeah,
we need to put you somewhere, because like it's very much established, these children are the kind of people that like if you don't give them a job to do, they're gonna find a job to do themselves, and they're probably gonna cause more chaos than they should. If you at least give them a job that is like in theory not that dangerous a job, you prevent them going, I'll come up with a plan that's definitely gonna stop the bad guy and not lead to another season of oops, we gotta undo all the time problems you just made.
it does feel that a lot of this is these kids are in support. Like, so if you, so we've compared this to Star Wars already, right? And so
Yeah.
there's that recent Star Wars series. Is it Skeleton Crew? And it's literally
Yes. Yeah.
the kids are doing everything. Jude Law is making the kids do everything. Like kids probably love it, but at the same time, you look at it and go like, is that like the kind of way someone would realistically treat a child? But in here, it does feel like most of these kids, outside of the ones who are literally piloting fighters, are very much in support roles. They're like doing some scanning stuff.
Yeah.
There's like a kid made of jelly or something who's doing tactical on the Protostar, but that's
Yeah.
also like Chakotay is like saying they go like do the stuff you're supposed
Yeah.
to do. It doesn't feel inappropriate, I
Well,
guess is the way I put it.
pulling back a little from this episode to give you a bit of context on Prodigy as a show, one thing I do think this series did better than I expected on is having a dedicated episode for most of this child crew of what is the episode where they sort of grow up and have their moment of if I'm gonna throw myself into these space adventures, what where's my moment of I need to grow up and take this seriously. I'm gonna throw out a couple of like really quick examples. Actually, I think there's one that's probably the best one to throw out. Rock, the character made of rocks. There is an episode in which a temporal issue has occurred, and basically time is moving differently for different members of the crew. And a problem needs to be solved. Rock basically experiences hundreds of years alone in a little time bubble and has to learn like as the child that is doing the science crew stuff. The justification of her being as good at science as she is she was alone, isolated with no one, and the knowledge that the ship was going to blow up and the ship's library. And you at a certain point you just start learning shit because it's something to do, and then maybe I do know enough that I can fix the ship. I'll keep learning, I will try, I will do this. And comes out of this with ultimately no time has passed, but I have been fundamentally kind of changed as a person by all of the isolation, but also all of the time with nothing but learning to do. And while still being played as kind of like this innocent childlike character, they don't fundamentally change the fact that she is performed like a child. It does give a little bit of believability to, yeah, that is a story where I can believe you came out of that with levels of knowledge that exceed what should be expected of you for your age. You've done the legwork to make me think that's vaguely believable. And there's like one of these for each of the main cast of characters that do make me go, maybe it's a little unbelievable, but you've at least given me something on screen to go, this character has developed quite dramatically in a single episode. I can believe they're not just fumbling through this.
That's really interesting because I never would have I never would have understood that from the context clues, but
Yeah.
also wouldn't have questioned it in the sense that did you watch Alien Earth?
Yeah.
Yeah. So throughout that series, I was just like, it is really uncomfortable that these adults are acting like children
Mm.
because it's kind of the same thing, right? You're implanting
Yeah.
an adult's no, sorry, a child's experience into an adult's body. They didn't do that here, so I didn't. At no point was I sitting there going, "This is a really weird character who seems a little bit too world wise
Yeah.
for being a child." Though I did have issues with the child with a beard. Who the again I've forgotten his name, but the one who says his full name every time. He's got like big sideburns and
Oh,
a beard.
oh,
It's like,
yes,
this is a
yes,
kid.
Jenkin Pog,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah, yeah, Jenkin Pog's little. I'm suddenly realizing that most of these children's moment of having to grow up and be an adult is being trapped alone for a large period of time while there's no one else around and they are forced to mature in that context. Jenkin Pog's one is basically, what if I got woken up out of cryosleep to fix a problem despite being only a trainee engineer, and the computer will only answer me if I start my query with my full name? And problem after problem arises, and the AI refuses to wake anyone else up because we've already woken an engineer up. There is no need to wake anyone else up. That is inefficient for the supplies we have. You are now forced to, for several years, be an engineer by yourself on a ship, keeping it running because there are lives at stake. It is a lot of, what if we contrived an excuse to have you have to be in charge of a thing for a while by yourself so that you have to kind of grow up? Time really
It's
is
interesting because
the fear for children.
well, I guess that's fair enough. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
the fear of growing up as well as the ambition of growing up. I suppose
Yeah.
that a lot of these kids in the show want to be seen as older than they are not. It is interesting that a lot of the storylines you described to me sound like old episodes of the Next Generation.
Oh, 1,000,000
You know,
percent.
Picard gets stuck in like a flute or
Yeah.
something and lives a whole life. I'm pretty sure there's one where like Geordie's stuck alone on the
Yeah.
Enterprise
It's a
for
lot of
some.
this is, what if we took an old Star Trek episode, put children through it, and kind of sanded off the rough edges? It's, we're gonna do the episode about the Kobayashi Maru, but like, we're not gonna have you break down at the realization that this was a no-win scenario. We're gonna spoon feed it to you a little.
Yeah, and which I think is fine, right? Because I think again, looking at my notes, this is a show for children. It feels like a really good. I have to keep reminding myself, Laura.
Yeah.
It feels like a really good way into Star Trek for
Yeah.
some kids, right?
Honestly,
In the sense that your
yeah.
parent plops you down in front of it, and your kid goes, "That was so cool," and then you as a parent can sit there and go like, "You're gonna love this, and I'm going to show
It
you an episode of
it
Next
it
Generation
really
or
does.
Voyager."
Yeah, it really does feel like that primer for, hey, you enjoyed Jane, like Hollow Janeway, when you were watching Prodigy, right? Do you want to watch the story of like her big adventure before this? Or that one
You want to
episode where
watch
they found a
Lizard
Borg.
Janeway?
Yeah, that one episode where they found a Borg cube. Do you want to find out like why the Borg are so scary? It really does feel like a springboard on for that. Um,
Hmm.
Other stuff
And
I've.
again, going back to
Hmm.
like what you said before, is that I also think thinking back to like every time we saw a Borg cube, it was always really awkward. Right? It's just a big cube, and then there's lots of things floating around in front of it. That like it was never quite
Yeah.
integrated. But yeah, like I could see this team animating a Borg cube with a fight around it, and it being genuine, exciting, and
They do a
interesting.
Borg cube episode and it's pretty decent. It is.
Okay, well, I mean,
Yeah, they make it okay for children, but children aren't just gonna go, it's a cube, why is that scary? They did all right.
obviously, I'm going to have to watch this show at some point so I can actually understand
Look, it's
this,
not
because everything
perfect.
you say
It's
makes it sound good,
Look,
but
it's not
at the same
perfect. It's
time,
far
it's
from it, but
yeah.
like, I got weirdly invested in its convoluted time travel nonsense plot. Um some other things for anyone who's well, getting back to the episode itself we're supposed to be talking about. One thing I did like, even if this is a mainstay of children's TV, is the scene in the second part where Zero, the person who's going to end up in the robot body, is having the moment of, oh, I can sacrifice this body and that'll be okay. I'm gonna walk through the room that makes time fast forward. Um, Rapidly aging is one of those things you can get away with in children's TV as like scary, but there's no blood or obvious violence, so you can get away with it. They did not shy away from how terrifying it was to watch this person slowly crumble to dust while trying desperately to walk across a room.
But adequately relatable to people in their 30s as well.
Yeah,
That's how I
yeah.
feel like Walk
Oh no,
Speed.
my body is
It is
failing
interesting
me.
because
Can I
it's
hold on?
yeah, my bones are turning to dust. It is interesting because it does do that kids' TV thing of no one really dies. The
Yeah.
person piloting the other ship was a robot, but at the same time, it does show us a vision of Voyager blowing up
Yeah. Well, like they
completely. Like,
Janeway's XO, the blue alien whose name I forget, who gets hit with the time wave first. They're very clear to tell you, oh, a few batches of like some special time radiation that'll reverse the aging. Don't worry, he'll be fine. Like they have to stand off some of the consequences, but they do show you constantly
mm.
electrocuted Wesley Crusher held by the neck being tortured for time knowledge.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I can't remember that guy's name. Like, I know it's a name that's completely forgettable anyway. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I was a little bit when he gets kind of sucked into the bubble,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, okay, are they going to show this guy dying? And there's like, oh, he gets pulled out. I'm like, oh, okay, he gets pulled out. Is that? And then it's just, oh, he's now a raisin, and it's like, okay, okay, yeah, fair enough. Like that's terrifying enough. Like,
Yeah.
it was like it's refreshing in the sense that every reference I have for this series, which is mostly Star Wars Rebels,
Yeah.
is quite a sanitized, not particularly interesting show.
Yeah.
And this takes that a little bit further. It doesn't. It can't do what adult Star Trek does. Adult Star
Yeah.
Trek, but it doesn't shy away from actually saying something,
Yeah.
which makes it a little bit more Star
It's
Trek than some modern Star Trek.
the thing about this double episode I keep thinking about is I think you could do a version of this double episode or this storyline in an adult Star Trek without the child characters, and you could make it work. Like it would be slightly different, but I think fundamentally you could do a we've gone and tried to save Chakotay from a time anomaly. In doing so, we kind of fucked up the timeline. Now, an enemy we created by fucking up time is here and attacking us with technology we don't understand. It's a very reasonable Star Trek episode plot. Like, it doesn't feel like
It is.
it's not a different show's
It's
plot that you put Star
genuinely
Trek characters
the
in.
yeah, but it is also I can't remember the name, but it is more or less the episode where Julian Michaud gets really old in his dreams,
Yes,
and
yes.
like he's being chased by a dream monster who's killing all his friends.
Yeah.
So like there is an element of that to it as well. But I think you're right. But I also think that's kind of what Picard series one did in a way, and
Yeah.
they boofed it. So I would like I don't know what the overlap between the teams is with
Mm,
series like Picard and Discovery and Strange New Worlds and this. I would assume they're different because animation is just a very different thing to direct.
yeah.
I would like to see this team do something in live action. I think that would be
Agreed.
interesting.
And there is some stuff in here that I think, like, looking at newer Star Trek stuff that's been coming out, I can see ideas being played with here that have popped up in things that followed this. Some of the approach to trying to explore humor in a Star Trek setting does feel like it definitely had an impact on some of what Lower Decks does. Some of the ideas that are being explored now in Starfleet Academy, I can definitely see like, oh, you got some ideas from what Prodigy was doing in that sense. Um, it's certainly got its place in Star Trek. And while it's like Prodigy is definitely not going to be a series I go out and go, oh, that's my favorite Star Trek. Everyone needs to watch Prodigy. It's equally one where I now understand the adults who tell me it sucks that this show got cancelled when it did and that it got cut short. And I'll go, yeah, yeah, no, I will respectfully agree with you and not just humor you by saying, oh yeah, it's a shame.
But there's a lot of potential in it.
Yeah,
I mean, again, I've seen 2 episodes, and I look at it and say, this is there's something here in this creative team that could be brought back into Star
yeah.
Trek, and I would
This,
rather watch this, even a slightly worse version of this, which I
mm,
gather is what season one is,
yeah,
than say ever have to think about the first 2.5 seasons of Picard ever again, right? And that's okay. That's a low bar for me personally, but it's also a compliment.
yeah. And I will say there are some episodes of this. There's a couple of episodes of this that while watching it, I went, maybe if there's a week where I feel like just picking an episode specifically, there's a couple of one-off episodes of Prodigy I might bring up for episodes of this in the future that I think are genuinely interesting ideas I would love to chat about. Um, one of my favorites is a planet whose entire society was screwed up by. There is an episode of TNG, I believe, in which a red shirt gets left behind on a first contact planet, and it's never really dealt with that a red shirt got left behind on a planet that should not have had first contact. And they do a sequel episode here where it's like, oh yeah, no, this society tried to turn themselves into Starfleet based on the half-remembered ramblings of one red shirt. Um, the entire society is a knockoff Starfleet, trying to emulate things by like making panels that look sort of like the ship panels, doing plays that are stories the ensign half remembers. That's a real fun episode. There's a couple like this where I'm like, you didn't just go, let's do that Star Trek thing. They went somewhere new, established some new lore, and did some fun stuff with it.
I think that's the potential of animated Star Trek as well. I mean, regardless of what I think of this series, based on these two episodes, um, I'm always for anyone, including Star Trek, trying new things.
Yeah.
Do I think there's a lot of potential to revisit stuff in animation in a way you can't with live action. Like you can't make a well, I mean, you probably could, but it would look really janky given what we're seeing with the aging. You can't make a holographic Voyager era Janeway now
Yeah.
because people age, and the way we try and on aging is weird. I don't know what I don't even know who plays Chakotay. I forget his name, but it,
Hmm.
yeah, he is not going to look remotely like
Yeah.
right. You can do Jellicoe. I mean, the guy who plays Jellicoe must be in his 80s. He was older than TNG was showing. Like
Yeah.
so, I really like those elements that okay, we're bringing stuff back, but it doesn't feel again. I'm gonna just blast Picard a little bit. It doesn't feel like we're making an 85-year-old man run. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel cruel. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if
Yeah.
you remember, like I think it was one of the first episodes where him and his new friend who might be Borg
Mm.
are running, and it's like you can't make Patrick Stewart run. He's in his 80s. That is.
Yeah,
then they and
yeah,
then
they did
they
have to
make him
shoot around
immortal,
the
which
fact that
makes
he
it
was,
worse.
yeah.
Yeah, but like here, you can say we're going to bring Jellicoe back because it probably makes sense that he would be quite a high-ranking admiral in Starfleet now,
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily matter that his actor is in his
I
80s. It doesn't necessarily matter that Kate
mm,
Mulgrew's like 60 now. You can create,
yeah.
the viable avatars for them within the canon, so to speak.
The other thing I think that animated Star Trek has room to do, and this is I would talk more about Lower Decks here, is Lower Decks, by being pitched as like a comedy animated series, really found some good success in dipping its toes in being critical of its own source material, and quite lovingly so, not scathingly so. Like, there's an episode of Lower Decks I think about a lot in terms of like what animated Trek has the potential to do, which is an episode in which two people get combined in a transporter accident, and someone is able to say the thing out loud that live action Trek would never be able to do, which is use the adjective, "Oh, they got tuvexed," and then have part of the episode be revisiting the ethics of, yeah, I know we kind of glossed over that Janeway did that, but like now the comedy setup is multiple people they're getting two vixed, and they're all making even more grand elaborate versions of the arguments from that episode. But it's like by having a little bit of separation, you can kind of revisit some of these ideas from different angles or in more critical or critiquing ways without it feeling quite so like it's retreading as it would if you did it in live action. You get a little bit of that leeway and grace in animation.
It doesn't feel quite as self-indulgent. It doesn't feel.
Yeah.
It didn't feel too reverential or referential. Sorry, when say the Lower Decks characters went into Strange New Worlds
Yeah.
and called them those old scientists in the TOS era. It was a
Yes.
good joke, right?
Yeah.
But if that came from I don't know, like a live action character.
Yeah, it's
If they sent, it would have been awful. I would have hated it. In the way, again, I really hated it when Picard was like referencing Star Wars. It's like, no, it feels weird. But if animated Star Trek did that, it'd be absolutely fine
yeah. It
because it feels needed it.
Yeah. Watching this has weirdly made me go, you know what's an animated bit of Star Trek I've not watched in the longest time, and I genuinely cannot remember how it holds up or not, is the original Star Trek animated series. And part of me is going,
It does not hold up,
I
Laura.
can't
Laura,
imagine it
it does
does.
not
I
hold up.
can't imagine it does at all. But look, there's a bit of curiosity in me that's going like, how bad could it be though? And the answer is quite bad because from what I remember, it takes itself very seriously, like it's serious Trek still, while having slightly bonk on
It
the
does
head
read like
animations.
we're trying to continue the original series without series order, so we're doing it animated. That said, there's obviously this talk of they might reboot the original series with this new cast. Honestly, wouldn't mind if they made that
I
animated. I think that would make more sense.
Yeah,
I think that'd be more interesting. As much as I've enjoyed parts of Strangely Worlds last season, I didn't get through because I was having such a bad time with it. But I think it's a good season. If they did that with animated, I think that would work.
I'd be very
It
okay with that.
wouldn't feel quite as cynical.
Agreed. Again, that's the thing. You can get away with some of this dipping back into your storylines without it feeling quite so cynical when you're not putting movie level cinematography budgets on it. Animation just feels like I don't have to be too serious about what they're doing in the space with it.
I mean, it also feels. I think animation just feels a bit more versatile, doesn't it? You can explore things from a very from it's an intrinsically slightly silly medium
Yeah,
because we all grew up on cartoons that were far less well put together,
yeah.
and so you can say we're going to revisit the world of the original animated series and it'll be fine. But once you put real people with real self-conscious actions in it, it
Yeah.
just stops making sense.
Ah, my last thing I want to share from having watched this, been watching Prodigy to get to these couple of episodes, and this is just a personal thought that I have to get out of my head, which is for as initially annoying as it was watching these child characters bumble around the ship in early season Prodigy, um, and even like occasionally their choices in this pair of episodes, I'm like, I've gotta just ignore for a second. I do a thing sometimes in London called Bridge Command. It is basically going and doing Star Trek LARP, going and pretending to do Star Trek. Watching these
Oh, you've
child
never mentioned it, Laura.
Oh, I know. Watching these child characters make terrible decisions on the bridge does just remind me of like, oh god, sometimes when I do Bridge Command, I'm like, oh, there are adults that make choices like this when given a chance on a Star Trek looking bridge. And I'm like,
Oh, those are exactly the decisions I'd make.
yeah.
I would be sitting at tactical, turning around, going pew pew as somebody without the level of humour that this show manages, and everyone would look at me as if I was
You
absolute
should
normal.
be allowed to go
It's
pew pew when you shoot stuff.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, they let Laura Dern do it in Star Wars, and it was great.
So yeah, did you have any other thoughts on Ascension parts 1 and 2 from Prodigy?
And I think broadly, it was a very good advert for Prodigy as a show that completely passed me by, that I had no interest in. And I say this as someone who gets a bit of a kick out of kids' TV. It reminded me of the best things about
Yeah.
modern children's TV that I've enjoyed. You know, one of the comparison that immediately came to mind was She-Ra,
Hmm.
Princesses of Power.
Yeah.
It's not as good as that, but it has like a vibe to it that
It's got
reminded
moments.
me of that, and that's
Yeah.
exactly like these tiny little moments that you felt, okay, this is a little bit more sophisticated than we often give children credit for. It
Yeah.
doesn't assume like a a lack of emotional intelligence from
Yeah.
children, and I think that's what the best kids TV does. And I appreciate that, even if I'm not completely sold.
Yeah. It
But if there ever comes a time when I feel like I have actual time to watch
yeah.
TV again, I'd absolutely give Prodigy a
It's
go.
the way that, like, if I ever recommend the animated Avatar: The Last Airbender to people, I say don't get put off by the fact it's a little like child episode of the week for its first little run. Stick with it until Aang reaches the air temple and realizes all his friends are dead, and like it finds its footing there. Here, I would go. Episodes 1 to 7 of Prodigy are a little bit episode of the week fart joke, yeah, whatever. It does suddenly around episode 8 just suddenly go, what if we made a serious Star Trek all of a sudden? And yeah, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be, you're going to have to remind yourself this is a show for kids. It does become like a genuinely kind of interesting Star Trek with its problems. And again, I do think Ascension Parts 1 and 2, if you're going to jump in anywhere to go, what is the best that Prodigy can do in terms of like feeling like a Voyager successor? It works decently as a sales pitch. It's the thing that you can have in the back of your mind and go, I'll push through these because I know that this kind of show is coming. And like, as much as I say, like, there are other episodes of this quality. This is not necessarily an outlier, but it's the closest to a standalone look at what it can do that Prodigy seems to offer.
I do think it helps that it's 20 minutes long as well. I think
Yeah,
that makes this gets good halfway through the first
yeah,
season or a third of the way through first more
yeah.
palatable. Like if
It's
someone came, if people come to me and say, after you watch 7 hours of this, this gets really good.
yeah.
That's no. When
May,
it's these are 7 20-minute episodes
yeah,
and then it gets, I'd be like, yeah, okay,
maybe
fair enough.
2 to 2.5 hours, and you hit where it gets solid. I think that's not the worst ask of a show to have.
And I think probably just as a final thing from me, from what I've seen, I'd imagine this does feel like a lot of lost potential in the same way
Yeah,
Enterprise did. It felt like this was an episode where it knew what it was doing. It had found whatever feat it was looking for, and then it just got cut off.
yeah. So I've yet to watch the final 4 episodes. I got to Ascensions Part 1 and 2, and I'm going to tonight go and watch those last four. But from what I can tell, it feels like this is gonna. Honestly, it doesn't feel like season 2 is gonna be the worst place for it to end. In that the story that was the catalyst for season 1 is going to find its conclusion at the end of season 2. It doesn't get a chance to tell a second story, but wrapping up your first big story and that being where you end, it's a shame you didn't get more, but like, shows have had far worse places to be cut off. I get the feeling it's not going to end on a huge cliffhanger. It's going to be at least somewhat conclusive.
Yeah, I mean, I would be worried watching these episodes with Janeway saying multiple times, "We're heading towards a war." It's like, okay, you got like what 5 episodes left? Is that the war, or is this again, like I said, like the Romulan war that's coming at the end of Enterprise that we never see? So,
Honestly, the war that Janeway's talked about has largely been happening in the past, and this is, if we can stop this one, if we can stop Essentia, we can stop the war before it happens. Is kind of the thing we're dealing with.
okay, yeah. Again, glad they've kept it simple for the kids because I cannot wrap my head around.
No, again, it honestly, for a children's TV thing that is not doing recaps at the start of every episode, I'm genuinely surprised this was a weekly airing show, given that so much of its plot is tied up in, well, yeah, well, we've got to send this through the wormhole, but we've got to wait until Chakotay's ships come through first, because like that's the order that the events happened originally, so we've got to like not screw up the order of those events because of causality. We've got to put this ship back in this place but far enough back in the timeline so that this episode 1 can happen. Like, they make jokes about how complicated temporal mechanics are, and the fact that there are like 4 different types of ways that time travel can work, and we're dealing with multiple of the ways time travel can work, and that it's really confusing how time travel works. It's a joke that's repeatedly made.
Yeah, look, I mean, my takeaway from this is I was a little bit worried when you rolled Prodigy as the first thing
I
we're
was a
doing.
little worried too, but
I was kind of handing it over to you and kind of like you can always fudge this a bit if you want, Laura. And then you not only do you use the RNG machine, you roll Prodigy. But honestly, I'm kind of glad you
yeah.
did. I was pleasantly surprised by what I saw, given what I've heard obviously helped with a lot of context from you over the past 2 days of you binging this show, but honestly, a surprisingly solid start to
I
this.
yeah, I look. I wasn't sure. I debated fumbling the roles and going for something safe. You know, we're called where everybody has gone before. You know, if we'd fudged the roles and started with something safe, but I was like, nah, this is an excuse for me to watch a show that I was told in advance makes it canon that in an alternate reality, Tuvix got to be captain of a starship in a world where he wasn't separated by Janeway. That was enough for me to go, oh, okay, this is being written by some people that care about Star Trek and have opinions about it. We'll give it a shot.
Well, I mean, look, if it ever gets back on streaming, if Paramount get their act together, I'll probably watch it.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna watch it in the way I've watched it now.
very legitimately.
On the high seas, so to speak. But yeah, there's enough there. I think
Indeed.
that's
Well,
for. I'm very aware you've got to. Aren't you streaming now? Aren't you
yeah,
supposed to be streaming?
this is about where I'm going to start wrapping up because I'm going to go do a Twitch
Yeah.
stream. So, thank you everyone for watching the first episode of Where Everybody Has Gone Before. Geoffrey, where do you put stuff on the internet if people want to find the things that you're writing about and talking about?
You can go find me at geoffreybunting.co.uk.
That's just where
And I
everything
and I've
is.
even yeah, I am reducing my internet presence as much as possible. I am 34. I am too old to be online.
I am the same age as you, and I am in entirely too many places on the internet, and I wish I was simplifying my online existence. Laura K. Buzz,
Forgot that
that
again.
find me in places. That's where I'm doing stuff.
See, I knew you were the same age as me, but I always forget.
I always forget until you.
Like,
I always forget we're the same age as well.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's again, it's. I've spent too much time in my life outside because I look at you and you've got like this like soft, perfect skin, and I'm like, I can't be 34.
Oh no, my secret is HRT. Being trans takes years off of your face. Hormone replacement is wonderful for de-aging.
Oh, Kelly does that as well. Kelly's in her 40s and she looks younger than me. It's sickening.
Thank you everyone for watching. We'll have another of these in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.